kind of describe, the difference between whether an artist needs, a banker or does he need a creative partner. Another thing, obviously, market share is always a big deal in any industry, and the more copyrights one can own, the more productive copyrights one can own, the more financial clout one has. So music publishing companies are always out on the lookout for catalogs to acquire and buy, and that's that's another area of practice that involves evaluating a catalog. One looks at the net publisher's earnings, usually average over the last 3 to 5 years. And one looks at the dynamics of, well, where does most of the income come from? Was it from performances or mechanicals? Does it look like it's been underexploited in certain areas? Look at there's like no licenses. If ever nobody's bothered to get any licenses for film and TV or commercials here, well, maybe we could take this catalog and change the the earnings picture a lot more if we're working it. And that's fine. Of course, it's impacted by this general trend, economic trend in the music industry of what the evaluation. So it's usually based on a multiple of earnings of net publisher share, and that multiple I've seen range from anywhere from 3 to 15. So it goes to show you how it's really all over the place depending on what kind of catalog it is or the given state of the industry at the time you're making the deal. The other thing that's interesting about those types of deals is, a lot of times some of these old catalogs have kind of questionable lineage, is one way of putting it, or checkered pasts, right? I have one client that sold his catalog, and it had some amazing composition, truly great rock and pop compositions in it. And that, we got a lot of money for that. But he also had another division, which is part of the company, which had reggae music in it, right, that he acquired over the years. And when one does a catalog sale agreement, the seller has to make reps and warranties as to that the copyrights are all good and they don't infringe anything. And usually there's an indemnity escrow in an acquisition where some of the purchase price is held at escrow for a certain period of time, so no claims arise, and then if no claims arise, then the rest of that, then the purchase price is released to the seller. But in this particular transaction, we were willing to make the reps and warranties for the main body of the catalog, but when it came to the reggae catalog, no reps or warranties. You want to buy it, buy it. If not, because in that, particularly in reggae one, if you've ever worked in that area, there is a propensity to sell things more than once. Right? So, and there's there are many dodgy people that come to the surface, like in England, that got the guy to sign something while he was on tour there, and the same villains kind of pop up over and over again in these different catalogs and estates and things. Traditional type music publishing companies, which have basic function is to get exploitations, administer the copyright, and work with the talent. There's other specialty types of music publishers now. Music libraries have become very popular, and these are it's a company that usually they commission their own works, right? And they will own the sound recording, the recording itself, and the musical composition. So if you're a TV show on a budget and you need some music for a scene, you can go to them and it's a one-stop. Because otherwise, if it's a recording by some artist, right, one usually has to get a synchronization license from the owner of the composition and from the owner of the sound recording. If you're going to use a sound recording, it's two completely different pieces of property. And so each one is usually owned by someone else, and that's more work, And usually the deals are favored nations as between the two. One doesn't get a higher license fee than the other. But it's, it's a hassle if you're the producer of a TV show and you're on a deadline. So these music libraries have become very popular, and they do sort of a lot of stylistically sound-alike, recordings. In fact, sometimes they get sued for that by ZZ Top, I think, sued for a LaGrange sounding composition recording one, which you can have different opinions of it because it's actually, that song I think is based on a Robert Johnson song, frankly, but I'm not a musicologist. But they won. So, but music libraries are usually the compositions are written by the songwriter. They're usually the same. The songwriter is also the musician who's recording it, and they're usually deemed to be, by contract, works made for hire. So those of you that practice study copyright law, you know there's a big difference between a works made for hire and a regular copyright. The regular copyright, the author is the creator of the work. In a work made for hire, the boss is deemed the author of the work. Now, there's, in the music industry, usually the songwriter still gets credit for being the author, but the underlying copyright is owned 100% by the boss. The fact that it's a work made for hire means it gets treated differently in certain circumstances than if it's a regular type of copyright. And so usually, if one represents a songwriter that's doing that kind of work, it's a different kind of negotiation in that work for hire type of agreement, because basically it's the upfront money and the performing rights, songwriter's share of performing rights royalties, which even though the owner is deemed to be the author, the deals are cut such that the songwriter will still get the songwriter's share of performing rights royalties. Remember I said that BMI, ASCAP, and CSEC, they pay performing rights royalties separately, directly to the owners, to the music publishers and the writers. So the music libraries allow that to continue to occur despite the fact that they don't have to, technically, because they are deemed the author of the work. So, but those people that do that kind of music are usually just hoping that they get, on a show that gets a lot of, network performances, and they get their performing rights, songwriter performing rights royalties that way. But that's a new kind of publisher. It's not so new, but it's a different kind. And then motion picture and television companies, usually they all have their own publishing companies. So if they are commissioning a score for a picture, they will, the producer of the picture will own the copyright in the score, not the composer. And so these are usually different types of catalogs. We represent the Merv Griffin estate, and so it's got, all this stuff it's got the Jeopardy theme in it, right? In addition to all this music, from TV shows that people don't really watch anymore, but it's a different kind of animal, these types of catalogs. And like with the Jeopardy, that's an interesting copyright, because it's kind of a cool, if you think about it, it's good for ringtones or ringbacks or what have you. It's toys and all sorts of things. And then print companies, there's companies that are just dedicated to sheet music. The biggest one is known as the Hal Leonard Company. And there's all different kinds of sheet music. Those of you that are musicians know that there's the pianoforte, folios. There's something called a personality folio that, let's say, the songs of Tom Petty, right? Where it's pictures on the cover. That, if it's a personality folio, they're gonna, it's a different royalty that's paid to the songwriter than if it's just a standard song in an anthology of other works, for instance, where you're not using the name and likeness of the person to sell the sheet music. It's just the song that's being sold, people buying the song. So those are print companies. Capitol Records decided that they were going to change all these old recording contracts that were paying legacy artists like 1.5% royalties when it should have been like 14 or 20% of retail, right? So we're, in our great magnanimity, we're going to unilaterally raise all these legacy artists to a 10% royalty. Isn't that great? No, that's great. No, that is a huge improvement, right? But they don't. They still give them a fair count, right? It's like, so it's more like they would rather not pay 10% than not pay 2%, right? Because it makes them look better. Right? But we could talk forever about the squalid, things that have happened in the music business, and I love talking about that stuff. I mean, I think that there's a certain archetype of villain actually that I've come to recognize in the work I do, and it's like every archetype of a villain, there's a little bit of him in all of us, right? And if any of you have, I assume you're all music lovers, right? And you ever go to a show of maybe one of your favorite artists, and you hear them singing or playing, and you think like, boy, I really get them. Nobody gets them like I do. I totally get them, right? She's singing to me. She just looked at me. It's like, wow, we're fans, right? We love music, right? Well, if you throw in some of that, that with a little bit of larceny and wanting to possess something, there are people that covet genius, and if they can get a genius dependent on them. And a lot of geniuses are troubled, are tragically flawed people that have substance abuse problems or psychological problems. And they feel that if they can get this person dependent on them, that somehow the genius flows into them. And they really feel like it's their genius, and that they're justified because nobody appreciates this artist the way they do, and they really helped this artist. They really helped that artist score when he was in Amsterdam. He couldn't have done it without them, right? He was so appreciative, right? And it's really interesting how the same kind of patterns of behavior kept showing up in this work that I do, and oftentimes the same people, So, it's when you have great riches, whether it doesn't have to be money, it can be art too. It can be, rich in a gift in art, people will covet those things. And there's many ways that we use to justify trying to get our hands on that, possessing it in some way. Yes.
I'm not sure of the movie that it was, but it's like a movie that I just saw the other night.
We just watched it last night. Big Eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was just talking to my wife about it. That's sort of why I riffed on this now.
That's a perfect example of what you're discussing.
Yeah, that's it. Anyway, if I may, let me move on. Okay, so there's different types of agreements in the music publishing industry. I'll start out with sort of the most basic one, which is an exclusive term songwriter, sometimes co-publishing agreement. And that's where a writer is signed, to a initial period of time, let's say 12 months. During that time, the writer has to deliver a certain number of compositions to the publisher. Usually the term delivery with a capital D means that it's compositions that are released by a major label during that period of time. And, when they're talking about a composition, they're talking about 100% of the composition. So if you're a co-writer and you're only writing 50% of compositions, then that's 20 compositions, isn't it? Right? That the artist would be required to deliver if the delivery commitment were 10. So there's the term, and during the term there's a delivery commitment. And then after that initial term, usually the company has a series of options to extend the term for additional periods with additional delivery commitments. And the other components are, there's usually an advance paid to the writer, and that advance is recoupable, deducted from the earnings as they occur. And then for the subsequent option periods, that advance is recalculated based on the prior year's earnings by various types of formulas, usually based on a percentage, 75 to 100% of U.S. mechanical royalties is one way that it's done. Well, what does that mean? 100% of U.S. mechanical royalties. So that's just the money that was generated from the sale of units, whether it's downloads or physical product, in the U.S. Okay, so it's not taking into account performing rights income, or licensing income, or income outside the U.S. So you wonder, well, what percentage of the earnings is that? that it's probably somewhere around 25-30% at most of the earnings. So if they're basing the advance on that, they're not taking that big a risk, are they? So, okay, you have the initial term, then you have the option terms and the delivery commitments, these tend to vary by the type of songwriter. If it's a just journeyman type songwriter that other people are recording, okay, here, give me your 10 songs. But if it's an artist, the term of the music publishing agreement is usually tied in with the term of the artist recording agreement. So that you have what are called album cycles. And there's a very complicated language as to when the term begins and ends within a certain number of days of the release of the record embodying the delivery commitment. And then they have a certain number of months after the record is released before they have to decide whether to exercise the option or not. With producers, it's much the same, but not quite as rigid because the producers have more flexibility and they're able to control their destiny more than an artist. And then usually in this day and age, the income is split 50-50. Now the different kind of subsets of that, 75-25, I'm sorry. So you have these are called co-publishing agreements. And so when people say the publisher share, right, they're referring to 50% of the income, not the 25% of the income if it's a co-publishing deal. Because traditionally, income was divided 50-50 between the publisher and the writer. So the publisher share, that 50% came to be known as the publisher's share. So a co-publishing agreement is one where the writer gets 50%, and then he gets 50% of the publisher's share, which is 75%. Now the money can flow to him differently, however, because as a songwriter, he's getting paid the 50% of performing rights royalties, right? So with respect to the publisher's share of performing rights royalties, how much would the songwriter be entitled to in a co-publishing agreement? He'd be entitled to 50%, right? But with mechanical income, he'd be entitled to 75%. So it's whenever a client comes to you and says, "Oh yeah, he said I could keep the publishing," or we're gonna split publishing, or he's gonna do this as publishing. Usually, they have no idea what that means, right? They usually mean it's the whole thing, right? Oh yeah, we're gonna share in the income from this composition, So you really have to make sure that everybody understands it or using the words the same way, because it can be a difference of like 100% in the amount of money we're talking about. Other aspects of these agreements. So it's now oftentimes in these agreements, the music publisher might want to own 100% of the copyright, but pay the writer 75% of the income. Okay, and then you get into issues of they'll have 100% of the administration rights. So that means that they themselves can collect all the money and pay it out. In split administration, or split, that can happen whether the copyright is split or not, but these days usually the copyright it's owned 50-50 by the publisher and the writer. Then you get into the issue of, is the publisher going to administer 100% of the copyright, or is the songwriter going to be able to administer his own 50% and take it wherever he wants and issue his own licenses, or make another publishing deal with someone to administer that? And then, you can get into issues, well, how long are you going to retain these rights? And, whether there's going to ever be a reversion of these rights, some or all of the rights. That's just a few of the terms, that one encounters in the exclusive term songwriter agreement. Now, with staff writers, usually that's someone. Now, you understand there's different sort of communities. You have, in Nashville, there's a lot more of those songs are written by just journeyman songwriters, and a lot of the artists are not writing their own material. They're recording outside material, and so you have more Publishers in Nashville will do staff writing deals where they'll just have their writers come to work every day in their little studio and then pounding out songs and delivering to them, and then their professional people are out there flogging the pavement trying to get artists to record them. That's a staff writer type of deal. There's hybrids of those for like movie or TV companies, or a lot of animation companies have their own little music departments as well. Then there's the basic single song agreement. That's like the oldest type of agreement. It used to be that the publisher would acquire 100% of the copyright, and, pay 50% of the net royalties to the songwriter, and there would be like a penny amount or a percentage amount with respect to sheet music. But it still boiled down to approximately 50%. One of the major issues that comes up with those and with the other agreements is sometimes the music publishers want to apply an administration fee to the money that comes in for collecting the money, right? They will deduct 10% or 15% administration fee. Oh, and then you get your 75%, right? So, but it's a major issue to try, split administration and versus exclusive administration. As I pointed out earlier, the right to hang on to money for 6 to 18 months is, it's a valuable right. I mean, I've seen sub-publishing deals being done for, major catalogs in some territories where the sub-publisher takes 0% for collecting the money, but they get to hold on to it for 6 months. There's so much money there, it's worth it for them to do that. So never underestimate the right to hold people's money. And then another type of music publishing agreement, which is very common these days, is an admin agreement, administration agreement. And that the publisher retains a much smaller percentage of the earnings. The writer is not relying on the music publisher to obtain any exploitations at all or to develop the artist's career at all. The publisher's only function is to collect the money for them. And that's one of the better developments in technology in the music industry now, is that there are some music publishers that can be much more transparent, and a writer can log on to their account and see just how much money has been earned on any given day. Like there's some companies that will allow you to do that, and it still takes a long time for the money to kind of get through the snake. When you think about when you go after here, if you stop at the Starbucks and you give them your Visa card or something like that, how long do you think it takes, the money to come out of your, from your debit card to go into their bank account? Not 6 or 18 months, right? When I was one of the events I put on for the Association of Independent Music Publishers, so we had Dave Stewart, from the Eurythmics come and talk to him, and he was really funny, but he was not popular at all because he said he was bemoaning the music industry. I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but he was bemoaning the industry. And he says, this is bullshit the way you guys do business. See, I've come up with new ways of exploiting my. And he took out this thing that was sort of shaped like a cigar. He says, I've come up with my own vibrator, and it has lyrics, some of the lyrics from one of my songs, on the side here, he's passing it around the audience and stuff like that. He says, how come, when somebody buys one of these, the money goes into my account immediately, but when you all, when my song gets played, it takes you, 6, 18 months for me to get the money. He did not go over well at all, but I thought it was funny. Anyway, administration, though, is, a musician's job, a songwriter's job, is best spent making music, right? Not finding out what bars are playing his songs or what French artists just, they need people to do this for them so they can remain productive and do what they do best. And so administration deals I'm a big fan of them myself. Oftentimes, the administrator does not acquire any interest in the copyright at all. So it's just a period of time that this administrator gets to look after this catalog and collect the money and pay it out, and after that, the term is over. They can renew it if they want. If not, all the rights come back, and the writer can go out and do another deal. These days, it's really tough for artists these days because of the economic pressure in the business. The record companies their earnings have shrunk so much that they've turned around and had to figure out how to regain some of this money. So I'm sure some of you have heard about 360 deals. For those of you that haven't, that's a deal where if somebody wants to sign to a record company, the record company is going to want publishing, record rights, merchandising rights, and a piece of live income. Right? And so it's important for artists to retain as many rights and have as many chances to get back to the bargaining table as possible. I'm going to sort of speed along now. I'm almost done, and then we can open up for questions. There's film composer agreements. Those are pretty standard terms for the most part. The big issue being whether the composer is able to retain any copyright or not, and what happens if a soundtrack album is made from it, or other uses of the music are made. Some studios want to be able to acquire something and use it whenever they want and anything they want forever, right, without having to pay an additional use fee, and that's a hotly contested issue. And then securitization. I don't know if any of you have heard of like Bowie bonds that happened several years ago. That's where an artist or a music publisher or anybody is assembling a body of intellectual property, sound recording masters and musical copyrights, and is creating a negotiable instrument that can be traded publicly.
Pullman?
What's that?
Pullman?
Yeah, you know him?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that met with a little bit of success and a little bit of sort of raised eyebrows so far. But it's actually it's a great idea, really. It's a way of an artist to pull some money out of their career, right, and put it into other things and make other investments.